There is a sentence that appeared on American television last week that the mainstream coverage treated as one expert opinion among many. Filed away. Moved on from, it was not one opinion among many, it was a diagnosis. And the person who delivered it was not an Iranian state media anchor, not a Russian propagandist, not an anti-war activist. It was Robert Pape, a professor at the University of Chicago, one of the most cited scholars of military strategy in the English-speaking world. And what he said on camera on an American news network was this: America has lost control of the nuclear situation with Iran, and escalation to a nuclear dimension is now, in his assessment, inevitable. Let that land for a second. Not because one professor's opinion is the final word on anything, but because of what it tells you about the state of the analytical community that has been studying this for decades. When scholars of this caliber start using the word inevitable in public, that is not hyperbole. That is a conclusion reached after exhausting every alternative explanation. I want to walk you through today exactly how we arrived at this point. Not because it is complicated, because it is remarkably simple once you see the full sequence. And the reason most people are missing it is the same reason they always miss things like this. The coverage is treating the military story and the nuclear story as separate stories. They are not separate. The military story is the nuclear story. What America did with bombs and carrier groups and naval blockades has produced, step by step, the precise conditions under which Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition goes from possible to probable to, in Professor Pape's word, inevitable. And the person who built those conditions, step by step, the person who went to war explicitly to prevent a nuclear Iran, is the same person who produced the conditions for one. I want to be careful here, because intellectual honesty requires it. I am not saying Iran has a nuclear weapon today. It does not, to the best of public knowledge. I am not saying it will have one next month. I am saying the structural conditions that made Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition preventable for the last 20 years have been systematically dismantled by the war that was supposed to prevent it. And once you see how each piece of the prevention architecture was removed, the conclusion that Professor Pape reached becomes, if not inevitable, at least structurally coherent in a way that should alarm every American, regardless of their politics. There are three things I want to walk you through. Stay with me. Each one builds on the last. And by the time we reach the third, the full picture will be visible in a way that no single piece of mainstream coverage has assembled. The first thing is what was actually preventing Iranian nuclear weapons before February 28th. The mainstream narrative has always been that Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition was prevented by sanctions, by military threat, and by diplomatic pressure. All three of those things are true as far as they go. But they miss the most important preventive mechanism that was actually operating. That mechanism was the JCPOA inspection regime and the negotiating framework built around it. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, signed in 2015, did something that sanctions and military threats alone could not do. It put international inspectors inside Iranian nuclear facilities. It required Iran to ship the vast majority of its enriched uranium stockpile out of the country, over 11,000 kilograms sent to Russia. It capped enrichment levels at 3.67%. Far below the 90% enrichment required for weapons-grade material. And it created a diplomatic framework, a table at which Iran, America, and the major powers were all sitting, that gave Iran a reason to maintain compliance because the economic benefits of compliance outweighed the strategic benefits of breakout. Trump withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018. Iran began gradually increasing its enrichment levels after that. But even after the American withdrawal, the inspection framework partially survived. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors maintained some presence. The diplomatic framework, though damaged, remained technically alive. There were back channels. There were Omani intermediaries. There were quiet conversations in Vienna and Geneva that nobody officially acknowledged, but that everybody in the diplomatic community knew were happening. The prevention architecture was damaged, but it was still functioning. That architecture required one thing above all others to remain functional: a reason for Iran to stay inside it. A calculation by Iranian decision-makers that the benefits of restraint, sanctions relief, diplomatic engagement, economic normalization exceeded the strategic benefits of crossing the nuclear threshold. On February 27, 2026, the night before America and Israel launched their strikes, Iranian and American negotiators were sitting in Oman. According to multiple reports, they were close to a framework agreement. The prevention architecture was not just surviving. It was, in the assessment of people inside the room, closer to producing a durable agreement than at any point since 2015. The next day, the bombs fell, and every element of the prevention architecture fell with them. The second thing is the sequence by which each piece of the prevention architecture was removed. I want to walk through this carefully because this is the part the mainstream coverage has most completely missed. It is not just that the war damaged the nuclear negotiations. It is that each military action in the war removed a specific piece of the prevention architecture in a way that makes rebuilding it progressively more difficult. The first piece removed was the inspection regime. When America and Israel struck Iranian nuclear facilities, IAEA inspectors were evacuated from Iran. They have not returned. The last verified inspection of Iranian nuclear facilities was conducted before February 28th. Everything that has happened inside those facilities, or what remains of them, since that date is unknown to any international body. Iran is enriching uranium right now. At what level? In what quantity? With what equipment? Nobody outside Iran and its Russian technical advisors knows. The eyes that were watching are gone. The second piece removed was the enriched uranium stockpile constraint. Remember the 11,000 kilograms Iran shipped to Russia under the JCPOA. That arrangement depended on a relationship between Iran and Russia that was structured around Iranian compliance with the non-proliferation framework. That framework is gone. Russia is now providing Iran with real-time satellite intelligence on American carrier positions. Russia's foreign minister met with Iran's foreign minister in Moscow while American bombs were still falling on Iranian soil. The strategic relationship between Russia and Iran has transformed from one in which Russia had an interest in constraining Iranian nuclear development to one in which Russia has a direct strategic interest in Iran becoming a more capable adversary of American power. Russia's incentive to constrain Iran's nuclear program has not just weakened, it has reversed. The third piece removed was the negotiating framework. Iran's stated position since the war began is unambiguous. It will not discuss its nuclear program until the naval blockade is lifted, economic sanctions are removed, and war reparations are paid. America's stated position is equally unambiguous. Nuclear program constraints are a precondition for any agreement, not an outcome of one. Those two positions are structurally irreconcilable, not temporarily, structurally. There is no bridging language. There is no sequence of steps that satisfies both simultaneously. The table that existed on February 27th is gone, and the parties that would need to sit at a new one are further apart than at any point since 1979. The fourth piece removed was Iran's strategic incentive for restraint. This is the most important and the most overlooked. Iran's decision to maintain nuclear restraint for 20 years was never about principle. It was about calculation. The calculation was the cost of crossing the nuclear threshold, isolation, military strikes, regime-threatening pressure, exceeds the strategic benefit of having a nuclear deterrent. That calculation has now been inverted. America and Israel struck Iran without nuclear deterrent. America and Israel killed Iran's supreme leader without nuclear deterrent. America enforced a naval blockade that is strangling Iran's economy without nuclear deterrent. The lesson Iran has drawn from this war is not that restraint preserved it. The lesson Iran has drawn is that the absence of a nuclear deterrent made it a target. North Korea has nuclear weapons, and America negotiates with it. Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and America calls its military chief a favorite. Iran does not have nuclear weapons, and America bombed it. The strategic lesson is written in the outcomes, and every rational actor inside Iran's decision-making structure has read it. The third thing is what the path to an Iranian nuclear weapon now looks like and why the tools America has used to prevent it no longer apply. America has three tools for preventing Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition: military strikes, economic sanctions, diplomatic engagement. All three have been used in this war. All three have failed to produce Iranian capitulation on the nuclear question. And the specific way each one has failed has made the others less effective. Military strikes on nuclear facilities. America and Israel struck Iran's declared nuclear sites in the opening phase of this war. The results are not publicly known in full detail because there are no inspectors inside Iran to assess them. But Iran has not surrendered its nuclear program as a result. It has hardened its commitment to it. Military strikes did not eliminate the program. They eliminated the transparency that allowed the world to know what the program was doing. You cannot strike what you cannot see. And now you cannot see. Economic sanctions. The naval blockade is the most severe economic pressure ever applied to Iran. It has cut Hormuz traffic by over 90%. It has caused genuine economic pain. Iran is absorbing that pain because China is buying Iranian oil through the dark fleet at above pre-war export levels. The sanctions architecture that was designed to isolate Iran economically depends on the cooperation of the world's largest oil importer. China is not cooperating. It is actively circumventing. And without Chinese compliance, the economic pressure tool produces pain without capitulation. Diplomatic engagement. There is no diplomatic framework left. The Islamabad talks ended after 21 hours without agreement. The second round was canceled. Pakistan's credibility as a mediator has been challenged by Iran. The mediating countries, Turkey, Oman, Egypt, have not been able to bridge the structural gap between Iran's preconditions and America's preconditions. And every week without a framework is a week Iran enriches without constraints. Now, I want to steelman the counter-argument because intellectual honesty requires it. The counter-argument is Iran has been at the nuclear threshold before. It has chosen not to cross it. The fear of American and Israeli military retaliation is a real constraint, even without a formal agreement. A nuclear-armed Iran would trigger a regional proliferation cascade that Iran's own security interests argue against. Saudi Arabia would seek nuclear weapons. Turkey would seek nuclear weapons. Egypt would seek nuclear weapons. A nuclear Middle East is not in Iran's interest any more than it is in anyone else's. These are serious points. I want to acknowledge their weight. The proliferation cascade argument is real. The deterrence argument is real. Iran's decision-makers are rational actors who understand second-order consequences. But here is what the counter-argument misses. It assumes Iran is making its nuclear calculation in the same strategic environment that existed before February 28th. It is not. The environment has changed in three specific ways that alter the calculation. First, the military retaliation deterrent has been stress-tested and found limited. America struck Iran for 40-plus days. Iran is still here. The deterrent is real, but it is not unlimited. Iran now knows the outer boundary of American military pressure and has survived it. Second, the diplomatic off-ramp no longer exists. In previous moments when Iran approached the nuclear threshold, there was always a diplomatic path back, a negotiating framework, a set of incentives that made restraint economically rational. That path is structurally blocked right now. Iran cannot accept American terms without domestic political collapse. America cannot accept Iranian terms without abandoning the stated objective of the war. There is no off-ramp. Third, the international support for preventing Iranian nuclear weapons has fractured. Russia has reversed its position. China is actively sustaining Iran's economy through the blockade. Pakistan is positioned as Iran's diplomatic partner. The global coalition that made previous containment efforts viable, the coalition that made JCPOA possible in the first place, no longer exists in the form required to constrain Iran. Remove the military deterrent's unlimited credibility. Remove the diplomatic off-ramp. Remove the international coalition. What remains? The rational calculation that a nuclear deterrent is Iran's best and possibly only insurance against the next military campaign. Let me connect this to what it means for you watching this in the United States. Because the downstream consequences of a nuclear-armed Iran are not abstract. A nuclear Iran changes the cost of every American military commitment in the Middle East permanently. It changes the terms on which Gulf states calculate their security arrangements with America. It almost certainly triggers Saudi nuclear weapons development. Saudi Arabia has been explicit that it will seek nuclear weapons if Iran acquires them. It changes the terms of the Israel-America relationship in ways that will reshape American domestic politics. And it changes the global non-proliferation architecture in ways that accelerate nuclear weapons programs in North Korea, in potential future cases in Southeast Asia, in every state that looks at Iran's experience and draws the conclusion that nuclear weapons are the only reliable guarantee of survival. All of those consequences land on American security commitments, American defense spending, American alliance relationships, and ultimately, the American economy that funds all of the above: your tax bill, your gas price, your defense budget, your children's security environment. All of it is affected by what happens in the next 12 to 18 months as Iran makes its nuclear calculation in the strategic environment that this war has created. Trump went to war to prevent a nuclear Iran. The war he launched has produced the structural conditions for one. Professor Pape did not say that to be provocative. He said it because when you remove every element of the prevention architecture one piece at a time and replace it with conditions that make nuclear acquisition rational, inevitable is the analytically honest word. I want to be precise about what I am not saying. I am not saying this outcome is certain. I am not saying it cannot be reversed. I am saying the path to reversal requires a diplomatic framework that does not currently exist, a Chinese decision to constrain Iran economically that China currently has no incentive to make, and an Iranian strategic calculation to step back from the nuclear threshold at a moment when every lesson of the past 46 days argues for crossing it. That is a narrow path. Professor Pape called it inevitable. I will call it the most dangerous strategic situation America has faced since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I will note that the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved not by military escalation, but by the most precise and disciplined diplomatic back-channel communication in American history. America does not currently have that channel with Iran. It does not have the intermediary that both sides trust. It does not have the framework. It does not have the time pressure that forces a decision before the window closes. History does not announce itself. The British public in 1938 was told that every diplomatic failure was manageable and that the next round of talks would produce a different result. The failure accumulation was only visible in retrospect. America is accumulating exactly that kind of failure right now on exactly this question. And the stakes of this particular failure, a nuclear-armed Iran in a nuclear Middle East with a fractured non-proliferation regime, are of a different order of magnitude than anything else this conflict has produced. Watch 3 signals in the next 30 days. The first is whether IAEA inspectors are permitted to return to Iran as part of any ceasefire language. Any ceasefire that does not include inspection access is a ceasefire that leaves Iran enriching without visibility. Watch for inspection language specifically. The second is whether Russia makes any public statement about Iranian nuclear restraint. Russia has every ability to constrain Iranian nuclear development if it chooses to. It constrained it under Obama. It is choosing not to now. Any change in Russian public posture on Iranian nuclear weapons is a signal that the back-channel diplomacy that matters most is moving. The third is what Professor Pape and the analysts who agree with him say in 60 days. If they are still using the word inevitable, the window that existed in February has not reopened. If they are using different language, something has changed in the structural environment that is not yet visible in the public reporting. I do not know which direction this goes. What I know is that the prevention architecture that kept Iran below the nuclear threshold for 20 years has been dismantled piece by the war that was supposed to strengthen it. And the person who launched that war, who called it a victory, who said Iran was collapsing, who doubted his own intelligence agencies when they told him China was arming Iran, that person has not yet publicly grappled with what Professor Pape and a growing community of American strategic analysts are saying out loud. The gift sequence has a final gift, and it is the one that cannot be taken back. Tell me in the comments, do you think America has a credible path to preventing a nuclear Iran from here? And if not, what does a nuclear Middle East mean for the next 30 years? I read every comment. I want to know what you think. The people around you are watching the ceasefire clock and the carrier groups. They are missing the nuclear clock, the one that has been running since February 28th without inspectors, without a framework, without a coalition, and without a path back to the table. Share this with one person who thinks this war is about the Strait of Hormuz. Because the strait will eventually reopen, what Iran does with its uranium program in the meantime will not be reversible. This is the analysis that matters, and we will be here for every chapter of what comes next.